Hello and good morning. I'm Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I'm here on, what is today, March 5th, a blustery, windy, snowy day in St. Louis. I don't know if you can quite tell out of the window. You probably can't, but it is. It's windy, really windy here and snowy. Good morning, Melissa, LB Jeeper, Nicole. Thanks for joining today. I have a few fun topics to talk about, but as usual, you are welcome to ask me anything. And even related to that, this past weekend, Vantage, for reasons I don't entirely understand, crept up to the top of the hotness chart on Board Game Geek, and so I decided to let people know that they could ask me anything they wanted about it. And so I put up a Vantage Ask Me Anything AMA on Board Game Geek over the weekend, and got a lot of great questions from that. So I might poke into some of those questions today if people are interested. You can also ask me anything about Vantage here if you'd like, but you can also check out that thread. I put it in the description of the video if you want to see some of the questions that people were asking about Vantage and how I answered them. Vantage, for context, if you don't know, is my cooperative open world non-campaign game for 1 to 6 players that is being released this summer. Steve says, you get snow yet? I missed the 8-inch blizzard, but still got some. No, I wouldn't call it a blizzard for us, but it is very windy right now in St. Louis. I can hear the wind. The wind woke us up last night. Walter doesn't know what to do with the wind, our cat Walter. And I'm supposed to go out for lunch today right after this. So I will be driving in these conditions a little hesitantly, but I think it'll be okay. It's the visibility is fine. It's just really, really windy. Yeah, Jeff's here in St. Louis. Jeff, what are you thinking about the weather right now in St. Louis? Jeff also said, what a first episode of Survivor. Any favorites, and did you vote? I did vote. Absolutely, I did vote. So for Survivor 48, which is happening right now, in fact, new episode on tonight. I won't watch it till tomorrow probably. But Survivor is doing this thing where you can vote on elements for season 50, which they'll start filming in the fairly near future. And so I voted to give them more rice. I don't get any joy out of seeing them starve on Survivor. I voted to keep fire making, and I voted to keep the live tribal. I actually like it, but I would also like them to add, in addition to that, a reunion show that follows months later, so that Jeff can interview all 20 or all 18 contestants and give them some time to have processed what the season meant to them. So those are my initial votes. I can hear Megan returning right now from her workout from this blustery snow. Let's see what her face says about the conditions. You won't see her face, but I will. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a face. Okay. Yeah, very cold and windy here in St. Louis. Let's see. Anthony says, congrats on Vantage being in the top list of Board Game Geek. I have a question about Finspan. In your opinion, do you think it was rushed in the making? No, not at all, Anthony. I wouldn't say. Finspan started being made at the same time as Wormspan, and it took a full extra year for it to be ready compared to Wormspan. Not that comparison necessarily matters, but I mean, it took over 3 years from inception to creation. So no, I don't think it was rushed at all. Sam says, he says, is there something special to discover in the game with how the coins fit together? So Sam's referring to the metal coins in Vantage and their cardboard versions in the game itself. And I think that is an interesting observation, Sam. I don't want to say yes or no to that question, but I think it's a good observation that the coins in Vantage do fit together. It's a form of a cohesive whole in a way. So one of the big topics for me, I mentioned in the subject line today, is Gamers Ranch. So Gamers Ranch is I guess it's a vacation property in the middle of Missouri. It's about a 2-hour drive outside of St. Louis to the west. That David, a guy named David, put together this really, really cool vacation property that is based around playing primarily tabletop games, but there's also really nice pinball machines that I never seem to make time to play, even though I've heard they're awesome. Just a ton of tabletop games, thousands easily of tabletop games, plenty of space to play them, a big kitchen to cook food, sleeping space for around 20 people, and a full 18 basket disc golf course that is right outside, along with a pond that is right outside as well. So there's outdoor gaming, there's indoor gaming, and I've been trying to go every year for the last couple of years. And so I kind of hosted a little event for friends this past weekend at the Gamers Ranch, and I had a delightful time. The food that everyone cooked and brought and prepared was amazing, and I played probably around 20 different games, a few prototypes, primarily published games that we found on the shelves there. And so I was trying to narrow it down to like my favorites, but I just had a great time playing with such a variety of wonderful people that it was really hard to pick my favorites. But I'll rapid fire list the games that were new to me that I played, and then some of my favorites that were old to me that I also played. I played the new Survivor board game. Speaking of Survivor, I played that for the first time there. I bought that to bring to the Gamers Ranch. I played, what were the other first timers other than the prototypes that I can't name? The first time games that I played The Bloody Inn, played Alte Dawn of Civilization, I played Pompiers, the Survivor game that I mentioned, and a party game called You Must Be an Idiot that is a trivia game with a trader element. And then I played a lot of old to me favorites like Power Grid. Played Power Grid. I actually realized that I've never done a video about Power Grid, so I filmed one about it yesterday. I played Planet Unknown, technically the new expansion, but we didn't really use expansion elements. Played the Lord of the Rings trick-taking game a lot. Played Bites. I played Orleans. I played the new Mistborn deck building game. I played Lords of Waterdeep on the table. I haven't played that on the table in a long time. I've been playing only the digital version. Played Mlem, So Clover, Forest Shuffle. Like so many of my favorite games I got to play at this event. It was incredible. I had a wonderful, wonderful time at Gamers Ranch this past weekend. I would highly recommend it. It is a really cool place to go, just to chill in a beautiful place and play games for a weekend. And also, actually, two of my favorite things that happened while I was there, played 2 rounds of disc golf, had a great time doing that too. And while we were playing disc golf and just hanging out at the ranch, we saw that there is an armadillo who lives on the property, a big armadillo. They're surprisingly fast. We weren't trying to bother him, but he or she decided at a certain point that wanted to get away from us while we were playing disc golf. And in the pond, there is a river otter who lives in this pond now that I've never seen before. And so every morning, this river otter, we would see this otter just playing and swimming and shimmering in the sunlight. It was really, really neat to see. That's all. Gamers Ranch in Missouri, highly recommended as a vacation property for a weekend of gaming. Steven says, how might the tariffs impact the U.S. pricing market? Would this impact other countries where you have distribution centers? So the way tariffs work, Steven, is the importing. So if tariffs in the U.S., for example, if we import games into the U.S. that we have manufactured elsewhere, say where the tariffs are being applied, say China, the U.S. government is saying that the U.S. company who imports these games from another country, specifically China in this example, upon arrival at the U.S., the company, Stonemaier Games, needs to pay a tariff. I believe it's now 20% on goods created in China. The U.S. company, Stonemaier Games, needs to pay a tax upon arrival. So if a game costs $10 to make and ship from China, upon arrival in the U.S., we have to pay $2. So we have to pay a significant amount. $2 may not sound like much, but it adds up significantly. I mean, that's a huge increase. That's doubled the inflation that we experienced during the pandemic. And we're paying that. Stonemaier Games pays that, not the exporting country. Stonemaier Games, a U.S. company, pays that for goods imported into the U.S. That we made in China. Then the decision is, do we just eat that cost? Or do we increase our consumer prices, which impacts distributors, retailers, and consumers in the U.S.? It only impacts the U.S. in this case. Do we increase those prices? And my temporary answer is no. I would like the Stonemaier Games to eat those costs in the hopes that the tariffs are temporary. But if these tariffs are permanent, if they're 20%, if they go up to 30% or 40%, that becomes unsustainable for any U.S. company to eat. That is a significant increase in corporate taxes, essentially, to U.S.-based companies. And it will result in essentially inflation for U.S. consumers who see their prices go up and up and up as a result of these tariffs. So those are my overall thoughts on tariffs. I have a big article about tariffs that I wrote in December. That article still stands and what I said about it, although the reasons being stated by the government for why the tariffs are being put in place are not the traditional reasons for tariffs that I was expecting. But But to answer your question, Stephen, a little bit, no, it doesn't impact other countries unless we have a product that we import into the US and then decide to sell it to another country after that. But typically we send goods directly from China to Canada, to Australia, and to Europe, to our different fulfillment centers there. Steve says, what's my chocolate of the day? He says, I might need some cleaning, some after cleaning all the snow off his driveway. What is my chocolate of the day, Steve? Steve, I'm looking over at my little chocolate pile over here. You know, I still have some almond sea salt dark chocolate left over from Tony's, a big chocolate bar that I started last week. So I think that might be my chocolate of the day today. That might have been the same last week too. Jonathan is excited about a play test that he ran recently. 18 new players. Wow. With a demo copy of his political strategy game, Politic. 18, that's a huge player count for a game, Jonathan. I'm glad that went well. Congratulations. Aaron says, did you end up playing Civolution? I didn't. Civolution was on my list of games to play. I also played Terraforming Mars. I forgot to mention that. Played a lot of some older games that I just haven't gotten the chance to play in a while. Civolution was a newer game that I was very much hoping to play, Aaron, and I did not get to play it. I still have some friends who own it, so I will play it in the near future. But it's maybe my one regret from Gamers Ranch, because I think that would have been a good time and place to sit down for, a 3 to 4 hour game like that. Thank you, Anthony. He says, I enjoyed your recent video of top games that you enjoy playing. Yeah, so I did my biannual list of my top 10 favorite games of all time as of right now. And I always put a slightly different constraint on it, or I try to do that. And my latest constraint for the latest video was I could only pick games that I actually own. In the past, I've not had that as a constraint. And so it did change the list quite a bit, because some of my favorite games from past lists are games that friends have. And so I typically play the friend's copy instead of my own copy. So this time I only picked games that I actually own. Jeff says, I need to get to Gamers Ranch someday. Yeah, Jeff, you're in St. Louis. It's not too far away from you. Thoughts on the Bloody Inn? I do have a video about Bloody Inn coming out. The thing that I like the most about the Bloody Inn is the use. It has like a multi-use number on every card that you use in multiple different ways. So it's kind of like multi-use cards, but you're really specifically looking at one number on that card. And I thought that was really clever, that there was a single number that means different things depending on how you use that card. I thought that was a really clever aspect of the game. When I played the Bloody Inn again, I would not say it was one of my favorite games that I played at Board Game Ranch. I love the vibe. The theme of it was darkly clever. The art was beautiful, but it overstayed its welcome, in my opinion, by about an hour. So I would, if it was a 20-minute game, and maybe it is on Board Game Arena, I might enjoy that more. But for me, it was much longer than I wanted a game like that to be, because it's a game of very incremental choices that sometimes add up to something meaningful, but very, very incremental. Edward says, how likely are you to play a game that you don't, that you play a game that you know you don't like, but someone else wants to play? So a big part, that's a good question, Edward. If it's a game that I truly just don't like, I highly unlikely that I would play it. If it's a game that someone else is really, really excited about, and I know they're really eager about it, maybe because of the theme or a certain mechanism in it. If it's a short game, I think then I'm more likely to try it than if it's a long game. I don't want to get stuck in a 2-hour game that I already know that I don't enjoy. So yeah, I think the length might have an impact on it. Garrett says, Gamers Ranch is definitely a bucket list item for him. It seems like the summer months fill up fast. Would you recommend it for a winter getaway? Yes, but with a caveat there, Garrett. So last year and this year, obviously we went in early March. And I really like early March because the Gamers Ranch is out in the middle of the country. Like literally you are surrounded by forest and a pond. It's nature. And with nature comes some downsides, such as ticks. And in the summer, ticks on this property are actually a bit of a problem. You can work around it, but if you were going to go play disc golf, you were probably going to end up with some ticks. And so I actually really like the colder months when the ticks haven't come out yet, and we could just enjoy it without having to worry about that part. And other aspects of nature too, spiders and wasps and all sorts of nature that happens when you're out in a place like this. And so I actually would recommend the winter months. The one exception to that is if you are going to the Gamers Ranch because you want to spend time in the pond, there's a dock, there's a pond that you can swim in, then no, the winter months won't work for that. One other trick is that weather in St. Louis is unpredictable in the winter. Sometimes we have beautiful weather like we did this past weekend, and sometimes a few days later we have a windy, blustery a snowstorm. So that is a bit of a gamble in the winter, but I think maybe the late fall, early spring, like March, like November and March, I think are maybe the best times that I would recommend for the Gamers Ranch. Yeah. Rosie Pocket says, did we have a presence at Gamma? We did. Yeah, my wonderful coworkers, Susanna, Dave, and Alex were at Gamma this past weekend. Gamma, for those who don't know, is the Game Manufacturers Association event, kind of a convention. It's a trade show where it's not for consumers, it's for retailers, it's for publishers, and to a certain extent it's for the media as well. I believe it's now in Louisville, was where my coworkers went this past weekend. Oh, and Erica was there too. I'm sorry, I was thinking of St. Louis coworkers. My delightful coworker Erica was also there. She flew all the way from the West Coast. So yeah, we did have a presence there. We had a very cozy booth, and I've heard little bits and pieces about how it went. I'm still waiting to hear from a few coworkers to see what they learned from Gamma, from retailers and whatnot. But yeah, I heard it went pretty well. Let's see. I see some other comments about games that people are playing. I need a question today, don't I? I didn't come prepared with a question. Let's see if I have a question coming up about a potential blog post or a potential topic. So did I already talk about this one? I don't think I did. I decided that I think I'm going to do, in a few years, I haven't done a video about my top 10 favorite heavy games. And heavy for me is games that are 3.2 or higher on the 5-point complexity scale on Board Game Geek. And so I'd love to know your favorite heavy game. What is your favorite heavy game that meets that requirement? 3.2 or higher on Board Game Geek. I don't know. So that's my video question. I don't know if I have a blog post question right now. I don't know if I have one yet. I know our stakeholder report is coming soon. So if there's something about Stonemaier Games that you'd like me to include in that report, I do that annual report where I talk about our revenue for the past year, game sales, things that we've tried, things that we want to try, things like that. I'm doing that soon. So if there's anything that you'd like to know in that report, feel free to let me know. Let's see. Aaron, who is one of the panelists on our YouTube channel, speaking about that, Aaron says, I found it so difficult to pick my top 3 games for solo gamers. I ended up just going based off of emotional attachment. Yeah, that is a tough category to pick, especially when you primarily play games solo. Anthony says, any update on the possibility of Apiary's wooden hibernation comb pieces since the survey? No update since then, other than that we are making them based on the survey data. So yeah, we'll showcase them later this year when they're ready. Ian says, what am I reading right now? I am reading one of my favorite authors, Fonda Lee, is best known for her Jade City, Jade War. There's another Jade name in the title, Jade, this Jade City series. She is coming out, recently released a new book. I don't know if it's a series or a standalone book. And the book is called, I just wrote it down earlier today on my list. I'll pull it up right now. It is called Breath of the Dragon by Fonda Lee. And I'm reading it and really enjoying it so far. Really enjoying it. And I recently finished Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I enjoyed that as well. I thought it was the end of a trilogy. It isn't. It's just another book of the series. But I really enjoyed it too. Yeah. Chet says, how many discs ended up in the pond over the weekends? Both Megan and I on back-to-back holes threw discs into the pond. We had some discs that ended up like right on in the shallows of the pond, and we got those back. But she and I threw potentially pretty deep into the pond. Although honestly, so there's a really, really tough basket at Gamers Ranch where you have to throw through it through a very tight passage, and at best you're probably getting a par through this passage of trees to a basket where the about 15 feet beyond the basket is the lake. And so you can either go through this tight passage. I don't really have a throw that can do that, but you can also go over the trees. And on the first day, I threw a shot that ended up into the trees instead of going over the trees. And on my second round, where I tried this again, I threw the perfect shot. Not perfect for going in the basket, but because it didn't. It went into the lake, but it did exactly what I wanted it to do. And there's something really satisfying in disc golf when you throw a disc and it just goes exactly where you want it to go. It flies like you want it to fly. And it happened with this disc. It did exactly what I wanted it to do, except around 20 feet too far, or maybe even further. We don't know. We couldn't see it come down. I think it was probably somewhat in line with the basket, but just into this pond. But it felt good because the disc did exactly what I wanted to do. So one of my discs is deeply in this pond somewhere. Someday, if we go back in the summer, I want to bring some snorkeling gear and see if I can find some of these discs that we've lost over the years. Melissa from Tantrum House says that Melissa attended an event at Gamers Ranch last year. I really enjoyed playing the pinball machines. My goal was to put my initials on each machine. Oh, that's cool. I'll have to look for it next time. For some reason, I primarily hang out in kind of the main room where you get a lot of natural light. And then there's a second room with a lot of kind of fluorescent lights that has more tables and the big game collection. I rarely go in there because I like the natural light so much. And then beyond that room is the pinball room, which is kind of dark. And so I very rarely go into that room, even though, as Melissa says, it's the pinball machines are a lot of fun to play. Aaron reminds me here that Aaron was at Gamma. Aaron says, I learned so much, and it was nice to say hi to Susanna and Dave. That's great. Yeah, thanks so much for stopping by to say hi to them. Isaac has some nice things to say about Finspan. He says, it's awesome. Well done on that one. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you for playing Finspan. The online retail release for Finspan is this Friday. So the online English version of Finspan retail release is this Friday. So if you've been waiting to get it from like an Amazon or Miniature Market, this Friday is the time to do that. A Time for Gamers says, our local game convention, SaltCon, happened over this weekend, and I had the chance, along with many other gamers, to finally try out Finspan. Yeah, I think we sent some play and win copies to SaltCon. Thank you for giving it a try. Justin says, do you enjoy reading rulebooks? Personally, I love reading them, even if I'm not able to get it to the table soon. It almost feels like engaging with the game in a unique and it excites me to play. Gets me excited to play. That's a great question, Justin. I do enjoy reading rulebooks, partially to learn from them as a designer, partially to get excited about the game, as you say. But for me, generally, I like to read them right before I'm about to play the game. Because it feels like if I read it too far in advance, then I'm going to forget everything that was in the rulebook. And have to start over from scratch again. So I usually enjoy reading them much closer to when I'm actually playing. Anthony says, I was surprised to see that Vantage had a 2.85 weight on Board Game Geek and it's almost a 3-hour game. Anthony, I would take that with a grain of salt because I doubt that many people who have rated that complexity on Vantage have actually played it. Like some play testers maybe have rated the weight on there. I would say Vantage is probably right in the middle. I'd say it's around a 2.5 weight, although it's really easy to get to the table. Like the rules in Vantage are not particularly complex. So maybe even a little bit lighter than that, 2.4, 2.5, around there. But the playing time is more related to the fact that the game gives you a lot of freedom as for how you want to interact with the world. And you can do really difficult things that might end the game sooner, or might help you level up faster, or you can do really easy things and the game can go on for a long time as a result. Also, the playing time does span a little bit based on player count. The game gets a little bit easier at higher player counts. And so if you are playing with more players, there's a little bit, the game can just inherently go on a little bit longer because it is a little bit easier. But you can also, there are ways to accelerate towards the end game in Vantage if you want to. And also a viable way to play Vantage is it's in the rulebook. It says if you set aside 2 hours to play Vantage, you can play Vantage for 2 hours. Like you can just say, okay, this is the 2 hours that we spent on this planet. The game is now done. So the playing time is, I've put it at 2 to 3 hours to make people's expectations, to align with people's expectations that they're probably sitting down for a longer game when they play. But that isn't always necessarily true with Vantage. I see some picks at Heaviest Games here coming through. I see Ezra and Nehemiah from Mark, Civolution from Aaron, Spirit Island, Voidfall, Burn Cycle. And Jay Zargo mentioned White Castle at 3.02. So 3.2 is where it's completely arbitrary, but that's where I'm putting heavy games at for my list at least. So your favorite game that weighs 3.2 or more on the Board Game Geek complexity scale. Make Time for Games says, I will be traveling to St. Louis for the first time in a few weeks. Besides the Gateway Arch, anything else I should see while I'm there? Yes, well, Make Time for Gamers, I will show you something that will hopefully give you some ideas. I'm going to pull this up on my other screen real quick. So if you go to our website, and I'll show you where right now. Share screen. Here we go. So here's our website if you want to check out this information. So on the Stonemaier Games website, we have a section under About called Stuff We Love. Stuff We Love. So if you go here, those of us who work at Stonemaier Games, we share things that we love on here. You can, I don't know if you can really see the words on your screen right now, but they range from our favorite games right now, our favorite digital games, our favorite podcast, favorite food, music. Joe sometimes puts his favorite flower that he's encountered on a hike. TV shows from Alex, RPG accessories, all sorts of stuff from those of us who work at Stonemaier Games. You can even go back and see an archive of things that we've talked about. Lots of things that we love just in general for you to just general, not even necessarily recommendations, just things that we love. We love sharing things that we love. And on my list at the top is always my St. Louis recommendations list. And so if you click here, you can go to this list of wide variety of food categories of things that I enjoy or have enjoyed in the past before I was vegetarian. And then at the bottom, I have non-food recommendations, things that I enjoy in St. Louis. And very recently, one thing that I need to add to this list is I went to the Museum of Illusions here in St. Louis. I don't know if it's a major draw, but we had fun at it. I went with Megan and I went with Ariel, who is part of the Wild Optimists. They are escape room designers, and they were visiting from California. We went to this museum on Thursday for about an hour and had a great time taking some fun photos in these illusionary rooms that make you look really big or really small, or make you look like you're hanging from something, or you actually are hanging from something. It's kind of built for Instagram and TikTok photos, but it's kind of fun doing that. So speaking of, I guess I'm mentioning the last topic that I have on the thread here today is the Museum of Illusions. We had a good time doing that. You can see some photos of that on the @Jamey Stonemaier Instagram that I use for Stonemaier Games. I just posted that this morning if you want to see those photos. See heavy game picks from Garp Hill, Arc Nova, Agricola. Sam says, have you read the Dungeon Crawler Carl series? I highly recommend listening to the audiobooks for it if you like audiobooks. The voice actors and production are amazing. Sam, I have read 3 of the books so far, and I haven't done the audiobooks. I've just read them, with my eyes on my Kindle. But yeah, I have read 3 of the books and really enjoyed them. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I need to actually finish book 3. I haven't quite finished book 3 yet. See Grand Austria Hotel, Ney versus Wellington as a heavy game pick. Chad mentioned Scythe here. Helen says Arkham Horror, Mage Knight, and Scythe. Root, lots of picks here. Trishul says, as a designer, do you think expansions should be included when one considers game weight or makes a top 10 list? Or only the base game like some popular channels often do? Good question. I think, that's a good question, Trishul. In general, I don't know. Well, yeah, I can see it going a couple different ways. I would think for game reviews, it's completely flexible because you can say whatever you want out loud. I could say I'm reviewing viticulture with Tuscany, and my score for that is a 9.5. And this is why I like it. But when you're rating games on Board Game Geek, I think there isn't that much context around it. Like you can leave a little comment, but for the most part, it's just going into an algorithm to pump out the average score. So I would say when you're rating games, when I rate games, I rate it for the game itself. When I rate an expansion, then I can go to a separate page to rate the expansion. I rate that separately based on the expansion experience. So I would give different answers based on rating things on Board Game Geek versus more reviews that can provide more context for that decision. Paul says, I have to assume you did not play disc golf or get into the lake last weekend. No, we played quite a bit of disc golf this past weekend, Paul, but we did not get into the lake. No, just played a lot of disc golf and games. See, Arc Nova and Sulkin among heavy games. Ian says, have you ever been so frustrated with the game's rulebook that you offered to edit it? No, not to edit it. I have been frustrated by some rule books, but not to the. My focus is on Stonemaier Games, not on fixing other people's games. And it's always highly subjective. Like maybe I have a bad experience with a rule book. That doesn't make it a bad rule book. It just means that it wasn't a good fit for me. I've even been there's some games where I've been taught by other people, and at a certain point, I go back and read the rule book, and I realize that the rule book is not very good for me. And that if I had originally learned the game from the rule book instead of from another person, I probably would have had a very different experience with the game. I've definitely had that happen. Mark says, "How does your marketing team?" And marketing team, Mark, I'm our marketing team. It's me. How does your marketing team determine which content creators to ask to do playthroughs or rules explanations of your games? I see official plays happening on a variety of channels. So yeah, that's a big question, Mark. So it's a big question because there's a few different answers to it. We'll do specifically rules explanations. Let's do that one first. So for most of our games, I ask Watch It Played, Rodney at Watch It Played, to do the rules explanations. I don't always do that, but I often do that because Rodney does a really good job and he has a really good reach. It does cost money. Rodney is probably the most expensive of the content creators who do it, but because of how well he does and his communication and his reach, he reaches a lot of people with his videos. He is generally our go-to. We have worked with some other channels too that are great, but we typically go back to Rodney. As for playthroughs, that's a new thing. That's a new thing that we're trying, where we have this year, we are sponsoring around 8 content creators who are good at making playthrough videos. They're good at engaging their audiences with those videos, and they have decent reach. Like their audience size wasn't the only factor, but it was a small factor in the people that I selected for this, because if we're paying for something, I don't want 20 people to watch the video. I want thousands of people to watch the video. So we sponsored some content creators based on my selections. Yeah, I chose some content creators who make playthroughs and are good at engaging the audience and have a decent sized audience to do that. So yeah, that's marketing team Jamey deciding how to make who to reach out to for those different types of videos. Those are the only. I'm trying to think if there's any other paid video content that we do. We never pay for opinionated content, and for anyone who's like, for all these content creators for whom we have sponsored playthroughs, they now have to put that on any video that they do of a review of those games. They now have to say, Stonemaier Games has sponsored us for different content than this. We need to disclose that. But yeah, I think the only content that we pay for are playthroughs and the rules videos. See, Travis mentions Terraforming Mars as their heavy game. SETI from Ian, Power Grid from Wendy. We played Power Grid for the first time this past weekend at Gamers Ranch. First time in a while for me, Wendy. Great game. Rogue Calypso mentions Great Western Trail, New Zealand as their pick. See a lot of, I guess I won't read all these out loud, but if you look through the comments, you can see a lot of picks. Nicole mentioned Black Forest. A lot of picks for heavy games. They're heavy game favorites. And I'll go back through this list and look at it for when I'm making my list. So Paul's picks for St. Louis things to visit are Pieces Board Game Cafe. That's definitely on my list. The Miniature Market Retail Store in Rock Hill, the City Museum, Planetarium Star Show, Free Art Museum, and the Free Zoo. It's not called the Free Art Museum. It's the Art Museum, and it happens to be free. We also have a zoo that's also free. I also recommend the Botanical Gardens, which isn't free except for on one day, and that may be just for St. Louis residents. I think that might be something that you have to pay for, the Botanical Gardens, but it is really beautiful to walk through. Jeff also mentions the Forest Park, the zoo, the Science Center, and the Art Museum. Yeah, we have a lot of beautiful, amazing free things here in St. Louis. Jay said that they were just in Australia for the last 2 weeks, and we went on a side quest to see as many Wingspan Oceania birds as possible. Found some, but certainly not all. Was there one that surprised you when you saw it in person compared to being on the card, like that it was bigger or smaller or louder, or it could fly and you didn't think it could fly, or can't fly and you thought it could fly? Anything like that, Jace, that surprised you when you saw those birds in person? That is a neat side quest to go on. Chet says, have you played Robot Quest Arena yet? I didn't see a video for it. It's a fun battler game where it doesn't matter if you die. It might appeal to someone who doesn't like combat. I actually played it at Gamers Ranch last year, and I keep pushing it back. So I filmed a video about it last year, and it keeps getting pushed back for some reason, or maybe I posted it. But I feel like that's one that kept getting pushed back. So eventually it'll show up on my channel, but I do have a video about it. I played it once. Mark says, have you seen the announcement for Agricola Dead Harvest? Agricola with zombies. Does this combination entice you? So Mark, I'm kind of fascinated by it because years ago when I was playing Agricola, I kind of had I said something that I hear now about other games. And I disagree with my past self about this now, but I was playing Agricola, and I remember a moment where I was playing, I was like, oh, wow, what if we could attack each other in this game? What would that add to this game? What if we could attack each other? And I realized in hindsight, I don't want that from Agricola. I don't want other players attacking me. We already are taking things that other people want in the worker placement action spots. I don't want to deal with someone having to invade my farm. However, I wouldn't mind having a third-party entity, not another player, but a third party like zombies, invade the farm and have to deal with that. Because then at least I'm not dealing with other players. I'm dealing with an antagonistic force, but not my friends. And I'm not attacking my friends and they're not attacking me. And so I kind of like that twist on it. I think it's kind of a clever twist. I don't know if it's something that that will really hit a sweet spot for me. Because when I play Agricola, I like to just build my own farm and do my best to build my own farm. But instead of having to deal with the threat of starvation in your Agricola, having to deal with the threat of zombies seems like a reasonable threat. So I am curious about it. I do look forward to trying it and playing it when it comes out. I do want to point this out. So Miles was a Gamer Search with me this past weekend. He says that he almost aced 8 each time. And Miles is absolutely correct about that. Like Miles has a few aces in his day. And he came incredibly close twice this past weekend to acing the same basket on different days. Yeah. Miles, I wish you had gotten it. It was so close to you, even hitting some metal. Almost hit some metal both times. Carlos says, in an article you wrote in 2022 celebrating women at Stonemaier Games, you mentioned a collaboration with the Wild Optimists. Is that collaboration still ongoing? So yeah, I can finally mention this a little bit, Carlos. There are some puzzles in Vantage that, and some of those puzzles were designed by the Wild Optimists, Ariel and Juliana. There are things that you'll have to discover, that you may discover, you may not discover them. They're in Vantage somewhere. These puzzles that were designed by the Wild Optimist. Yeah, that was the collaboration. Justin says, have I seen the animated film Flow? It just won an Oscar. Cat trying to survive a flooding environment with fellow animal companions. No dialogue. Justin recommends it. We watched, I would say, around 45 minutes of it, and I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was amazing, amazing visually to look at. I would not say it's kind of a very chill movie, despite the tension and the intensity in it. And Megan ended up falling asleep while watching it, and I was kind of starting to drift off while watching it myself. I think the lack of dialogue is admirable, is impressive, but it didn't keep us as engaged to stay awake while watching it as I would have liked. But from a visual standpoint, it's an incredible achievement. Really, really beautiful to watch. To at least watch some of Flow. And Justin, I'm glad you mentioned it here. Melissa mentioned some of her favorite recent heavy games: Minhos, Talatum, Tekhenu, SETI, and Raising Robots. I prefer indirect player interaction. I do too, Melissa. Let's see. Mark says, what kind of card do you drive? Mark, I've talked about this on my personal blog. It's recently become a point of wondering why I made this choice. But a few years ago, I bought a Tesla Model 3, and it feels a little weird to drive it now because I don't agree with the person that Elon Musk has emerged to be politically is not the type of person that I want to support. But my car is completely paid off, and so the only money that Elon gets from me now is when I use a supercharger. He probably gets a few cents off that somehow. So I begrudgingly drive a Tesla Model 3, and I really enjoy the car, but not one of the people beyond the many people who went into creating this car. I guess even though he is the figurehead of the company, there are a lot of people at Tesla that work very hard to create things that hopefully make the world a slightly better place using the plug-in format for these cars. Seven Castles Game says, due to the tariffs with China, are you repricing your games or absorbing the costs? Specifically, what's the plan for Vantage? I am still hoping that the tariffs will be temporary, and so we are absorbing the cost. We are not passing on that cost to consumers. But this is one of the reasons that we don't announce the prices for our games until we're ready to actually sell them, because there are factors out of our control that can affect those costs. Freight shipping can skyrocket. Tariffs can happen. Unexpected things can happen. And so I am hoping, very much hoping, that it will not impact the price of Vantage. But if the tariffs continue to go up, that is a distinct possibility. Let's see, just going through looking for questions right now. I'm actually almost caught up here. I like this. Okay, talking about zombies interacting with games. The Infinite Dude says the way Creature Caravan does zombies is interesting. They just stick to you and follow your caravan and subtract points at the end if you left them alone. They don't otherwise obstruct decisions. I like that too. Zombies are a viable way to get points in the game by destroying, I guess effectively you're destroying the zombies by destroying them, or you can kind of just deal with them and let them follow your caravan and get some negative points at the end of the game. Super Keener says, at what point in the design process do you start paying more attention to balancing? Definitely not really early on. Like early on is just trying to test out ideas to see what works, what doesn't work. I really start to focus on balancing usually when we get to the blind playtesting stage, when I'm sending the prototypes out worldwide. At that point, I'm asking for, I'm really looking for data at that point, like what elements of asymmetry or imbalance, what cards are overpowered or underpowered based on whether they were how players felt about them. I'm looking for data about those cards, but also how players feel about them, which I think is important for balance. And balance isn't just about, a formula for every card. A card can be formulaically balanced, but feel overpowered or underpowered, and that feeling is valid too. So during the blind playtesting process is when I really start to focus on that. Another question about tariffs from Leon. Will the U.S.-Canada tariff wars affect the price of your board games for Canadian customers? No, they won't, because all of our products that go into Canada come directly from China. So if Canada puts a tariff on China, then we will then pay a tax to Canada for goods that we import from China to Canada. But we send very little from the U.S. to Canada. Almost everything goes directly from China to Canada. Chad says, do you plan to watch Daredevil Born Again? I watched the first 2 episodes and I'm really happy they kept the same tone as the Netflix series. I have never, other than like watching a few clips of some long shots from the original series, I didn't watch the original Daredevil. So currently I don't have plans on watching the new series, but maybe if it gets really good reviews, maybe I will. I just generally, for superhero stuff, I don't gravitate towards the darker shows. Even though I know there's a dark side to most superhero stuff, I just don't gravitate towards the darker shows. Nelson says, Vantage will make for excellent storytelling. I hope so. I think so. I tried to do that. I wonder if a homebrew tabletop RPG could be built in its universe. Nelson, it is possible, but I would say that you are going to get a lot of a role-playing experience from playing Vantage itself. I don't know if adding another RPG for Vantage will significantly enhance the experience. Vantage lets you play, it gives you a world of choices to make out of the box. So yeah, we'll see. I don't want to knock down that idea, but I'm curious to see if you feel that there's a need for that after you play Vantage. Patrick says, if someone submits a game to Stonemaier, what is the expectation on the level of graphic design art on the prototype? Well, Patrick, good question. I would say for the initial two phases of submitting the game to Stonemaier Games doesn't involve sharing a prototype with us at all. At that point, it's you sharing a few details about the game, going through our guidelines and checking off some boxes, and potentially sharing either a sell sheet and or a short video showing a few turns of the game and maybe highlighting a few of your favorite things about the game. If you get past those 2 stages, then when we ask for a prototype, it just needs to be playable for us to play without your guidance. So the rulebook needs to be solid and the graphic design just needs to be intuitive. We don't need any art on it. You can throw in a few sample illustrations if you have an idea for how you want the world to look for the game. But we don't really need art. We just need graphic design that we understand the graphic design so that we can actually play it. Let's see. Make Time for Games says, I've seen Tokaido at my local game store, but didn't give it much thought to play it. That was until your announcement. Now I'm excited to play it. Any updates on a release date? So we are anticipating that our version of Tokaido, which is pretty much the same one that you saw on the shelf, but with a refined rulebook with some added accessibility elements and with an added solo mode, we are expecting to have it on our web store in early April and then a retail release soon after that. We are also working on Tokaido Duo. We're working on the Tokaido expansions. And at some point, we'll probably work on a Stonemaier version of Namiji as well. Okay, Jace was one who went to Australia recently for birds from Wingspan Oceania. And Jace says, I will say the sulfur-crested cockatoo power makes so much sense now. Huge flocks anywhere people had food. They were like large, extremely loud pigeons. That's great, Jace. Thanks for sharing that. Megan was recently in Australia too, and she saw the ibis. I think the ibis is called the bin chicken over there in Australia. And she saw a few of them just hanging out around, big, beautiful birds. Ian says, is it important to have a good game prototype for testing? Yeah, I would say good is a good quality for a prototype to be good. What specifically are you referring to in terms of it being good? Like visually good? And for that, I would go back to the same answer that I gave a second ago, where just the user interface of a prototype needs to at least not impede the playing process. And the number one thing, I'll actually throw out number one thing that most prototypes are missing are player aids for each player. Really, most games that don't have this are missing it too, but it's crucially important in prototypes. When someone is learning a prototype from you and probably struggling a little bit to learn this game that doesn't look like a finished game yet, the number one thing that you can do to help that experience is to provide a really good player aid for that player. A reference guide for the icons, for what a turn looks like, and what the overall flow of the game looks like. Always do that. No prototype should ever not have a reference guide for every player, in my humble opinion. Patrick says, regarding balance, would a tool that could train an AI to play games to test balance be useful? It could run hundreds of thousands of games that can be useful in addition to human playtests. Patrick, in general, I'm not interested in AI at all, but you have touched upon the one example of AI that I am slightly interested in. I don't see it as a replacement for human playtesting at all, but for balance specifically, especially for asymmetric games, if I could feed the rulebook and the components of one of our games into some form of AI to run a bunch of playtests all at once, I know it would take a ton of energy to do so, but I think it would potentially help balance for that game. Because with human playtesting, you can't brute force playtest, a 10,000 playtests for any game. You can do your best, but you can't ever do that much playtesting. And so that is the one example of AI that I am slightly interested in. Owen Donnelly says, I recently saw your mechanism spotlight of psychic pizza deliverers go to the ghost town, a game that I haven't played in quite some time. And I love the novel approach to hidden movement. Are there any other hidden movement games that you would recommend? My number one favorite hidden movement game is the classic Scotland Yard. I love Scotland Yard. I love how simple and streamlined it is. It is hidden movement distilled down to its core elements. I still bring it back to the table a couple times a year. I love the game. So if you like hidden movement, I would highly recommend Scotland Yard. There are more complex variants of it in different different games, not Scotland Yard, but completely different games that I think are always admirable, but I always come back to Scotland Yard because of how streamlined and distilled it is. Hilda has a question for everyone here. She says, we recently played a few games we had not played in years, Royals and Scotland Yard. That's a total coincidence there, Hilda. So Royals and Scotland Yard. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed them. What's an older game you've enjoyed again playing recently? I love that question. For me, it would be Power Grid. I played Power Grid for the first time this past weekend in a couple of years now. Power Grid has to be around maybe 10 years old, 10 plus years old. And we had a great time playing it at 6 players this past weekend. Tony says, are you watching Severance? Yes. We're currently watching season 2 of both Silo and Severance, both on Apple TV, both excellent shows. Silo season 2 is complete, so we're finishing that first. And then I think we're like halfway through Severance, but we put it on hold to catch up, to get a few episodes to catch up on. And so we are watching it, but not actively right now. We'll probably come back to it next week after we've finished Silo. And I am really enjoying it. Tabletop Crafting Martin says that they're working on designing a board game and hoping to finish it at some point. Designing the game board, developing the 3D figures and ZBrush and so on is a lot of work. It is. I would say, Martin, that those elements are only important if you are planning to self-publish the game. If you're hoping to submit it to publishers, then just having a playable game is what's important there, not 3D figures. You don't need any of that for a playable prototype. Let's see. Mark says, "What's the best player aid you've ever seen?" That's a good question, Mark. Best player aid you've ever seen? I mean, I am pretty happy with the player aids that we make at Stonemaier Games. I think we make pretty darn good player aids. They can always be better, but I am happy with the ones that we have at Stonemaier Games. In another game, I'm trying to think. I know that I've highlighted some on the YouTube channel in the past. I'm looking over at my collection right now to think if I can find one off the cuff that has a great player aid. I'm looking at a bunch of games that unfortunately do not have player aids. Yeah, I don't see one right away, Mark. But I would say if you look at any Stonemaier game, I'm pretty sure that almost all of our games have player aids, and I think they're pretty darn good. So I would look at Stonemaier Games for some examples for player aids. I think that one of the keys for player aids too is sometimes I think designers think, oh, my game is simple enough that it doesn't need a player aid. Like there's only 3 different actions you can take on your turn, but put those actions on the player aid so no one has to remember them. It makes teaching easier, it makes remembering the game easier, and it takes away that mental overload of remembering those 3 things while I'm trying to strategize in the game. I think I've never encountered a player aid that doesn't make the game better or easier to play. That's my rant for the day there. Tim says, how do you feel about world maps that wrap? World maps that wrap. Not entirely sure what you mean by that, Tim. I understand the concept of a map wrapping around itself, but I think that's how most world maps work, isn't it? Like if you play like the Risk map, I see. Are you saying that like that you can travel from the far left side over to the far right side, like in Pandemic or Risk? I do like. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Mark says DST is about to start again. For those outside the U.S., will we expect the live stream later or earlier by an hour? Oh, daylight savings time. Yeah, daylight saving is, I believe, this weekend in the U.S. at least, and the live stream will be. So I believe this weekend we are jumping forward. We're springing forward by 1 hour. From my perspective, it'll be the same time. I'll still be here at 10 a.m. But for the rest of the world, that means that what you know as 10 a.m. our time will now be 9 a.m. It'll be because we're springing forward. I believe that's how it works. So show up an hour earlier next week if you don't do daylight saving. Chad says Awakened Realms is on a roll with all their special edition games, like they did Puerto Rico recently. Any classic games you feel would benefit from the special edition treatment? There are probably a few like that. I played Ethnos over the weekend, played the new version of Ethnos. I think that in general, it did a pretty good job of improving the game. I think actually the player aids in that, it's nice that they're there, but there are definitely some improvements on those player aids too. Any like modern classic game that could get a special treatment version? None off the top of my head, Chad, but I'm pretty sure there's some out there. I wouldn't have thought of Agricola for this among those. So it's interesting that I'm not entirely sure that they're the publisher of the new zombie version. We'll see. Let's see. Chad says, my favorite player aids have the rulebook page number for each rule so you can get further clarity on the rules. I don't see it often, but it helps so much. I agree. That's something that we don't do at Stonemaier Games, but we need to do more. I think that is a really clever addition. Here's one. Istanbul Big Box has a great player aid, which also incorporates expansions and uses colors to avoid overwhelming base game plays. That's awesome to hear about Istanbul Big Box. I see Helen says favorite older game that she still plays is the original Pandemic. Anthony mentions Bark Avenue and Cyber Pet Quest player aids besides the one that Stonemaier Games has made. I haven't played Cyber Pet Quest, but Bark Avenue does have a really good player aid. I agree. It's also nice that we found for the back page of the rulebook, that's a great place to put an icon guide and a quick setup guide on the back page as well. I think that can help players. Means that you don't have to technically open the rulebook to get to that core material. You just put it and you leave it just face down on the table to have that reference material there. I don't think that replaces a player aid, but it is helpful to have. Ian says, when you start creating a new game, is it by genre, mechanism, theme? It really depends on the game. Usually it's a moment where I have either a theme or a mechanism that I've wanted to work on, and I think of the opposite end of it. So if I have a theme that I've been wanting to work on, and I think of a mechanism that works well for that theme, I'll pair the two together and brainstorm from there. Yeah. Mark says, while I really like the special editions, I also really appreciate simpler revivals like what Stonemaier did for Libertalia and Garphill for Assyria. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that about Libertalia, Mark. I like that too. I think it's fun to see these special editions. Neat to see them. Usually they're really expensive, or they're much more expensive than the game that is currently available. And so I had fun revisiting Libertalia. I think we made it a nice, a great game, really, honestly, at a reasonable cost, reasonable price. And I think nearly every element of the game is upgraded over the original Libertalia without having it balloon into a really expensive game. So I do like when publishers do that as well. Awesome. Nelson has a good shout out for a game that Monopoly Go from Nelson. Monopoly Go has 3 actions and it still includes a player aid, hopefully for each players. Due to this, my players love breaking out this game. It really does help. I think of here, I'll share a game that I think could benefit from a player aid. Splendor. Once you know how to play Splendor, you probably don't think about those 3 actions. But if I haven't played Splendor in a while, or I'm teaching to someone, I want a little player aid that just explains what the 3 or 4 actions that are in Splendor. They're very simple, but that player aid does help if it's there. So I wish Splendor or games like Splendor had player aids in them. Anthony says that Land versus Sea builds some of the player aids into the side of the box, which is also the score tracker. That's a clever combination. Yeah, I haven't gotten that one to the table in a while, but I agree that is a clever implementation of a player aid. Thank you all for joining me today. I think we're winding down a little bit here. I'm going to head off to lunch and I'm having lunch with Connor from Inside Up and some of his teammates and some people associated with Inside Up Games. Going to talk to them about what's going on with Inside Up recently. He happens to be here in town. So I'm going to head off and have lunch with him in a few minutes. But thank you so much for joining me for today's conversation. I enjoyed seeing your picks about heavy games. I'll take those into consideration when I make my list. And I also like Hilda's question about a favorite older game that you got back to the table recently and remembered how much you really enjoyed it. Thanks for hanging out. Have a great day, and I'll see you next Wednesday after daylight savings in the U.S. is taking place. All right, take care. Bye.